Hey, this is Nina from NV Fine Art Studio. Thank you for joining me. Today we are going to paint a Siamese cat. To be honest, it's not my typical subject. I used to do lots of pencil sketches of my Siamese cats when I studied at art school forever ago, but it's always exciting to try a different medium. And in general, no matter what you are painting in watercolor, the techniques are always the same. I start with a pencil sketch. First, I draw a square to indicate the cat's location. Next, I divide it into 3 equal parts for the head, body and paws, and I specify the middle line. Then I focus on the cat's head and I do some lines to position his eyes. I make a few triangles for ears and nose to make sure the proportions are true. This is actually quite important to get it right. If you don't get it right, the cat's face will look cartoonish. As soon as I'm happy with his look, I go into slightly more detailed sketching with darker lines. Next, I sketch the cat's body. He has a very nice pose that radiates curiosity and cheekiness. I definitely want to show it in my painting. So, I'm not focusing too much on the details. As long as I translate his Siamese mischievous character on the paper, it's perfect for me. After that, I go back to his face. I want to reflect the same emotion in his eyes. So, I add more details and a few corrections to his eyes and nose, and also a bit of hatching to his ears to create volume. At this stage, I don't worry about the dark pencil, maybe showing through the watercolor, as the dark values of paint will cover the pencil lines pretty well. Overall, it's a quick sketch. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. At the end of the day, it's a cat's drawing, not a person's. With people, we tend to analyze if there is a similarity. But with cats, as long as the proportions are correct and the vibe is there, it's all good. Basically, I focus on the idea rather than similarities. Before I start painting, I usually choose tools for the project. I also think at this stage about colors I want to use. The first wash is usually very light and is there to set the undertone of the painting. If you have a color wheel, it's approximately in value 2. So, I have lots of water on my brush and just a tiny amount of paint. For this wash, I premixed raw sienna and light red for the warmer undertones and use cool mix that was already on my palette. Probably consists of neutral tint, indigo and cerulean. Next, while it's still wet, I drop some value 2 grays to give a bit of a definition to the big shape. If you're not familiar with value numbers, I'm going to post a video for beginners on transparency and values in the future. So please, click on the subscribe and notification button if you're interested. After my first layer, I'll let it dry a bit. Take a smaller brush and mix thicker pigment. I'm aiming for middle values here. The middle value define the form, they create shadows and emphasize the light. Even with a small brush, I still paint in a loose style. As you can see, I'm not really going for a hyper-realistic portrait and definitely not painting every single hair. I'm suggesting texture of smooth fur that Siamese cats usually have. When you go into too much detail, on one hand, you do not let the viewer imagination interpret the painting, and on the other hand, you do not let your own imagination, personality and vision play the part. And I think this is the most fun part of being an artist. I'm starting to paint the cat's eyes. I slow down here as I want to be more careful with my strokes. I definitely want my cat to have a bit more realistic eyes, as usually it's the first thing you look at, and dull eyes can make the painting look cartoonish. But on the other hand, I also want his soul and his curiosity to shine through. So I add a bit more shadowing on the top part of his eyes. In terms of technique, I drop a little paint on the dry surface. It creates hard edges. In some areas, like light reflection, I keep the hard edges, but in others, I want it to be softened. For this, I quickly clean my brush, take a bit of water and soften the edge with a wet, clean brush. it's important to have soft and hard edges for the painting to look three-dimensional, diverse and lively. In some areas, like ears, I do a bit of negative painting, and sometimes I skip a stroke here and there to suggest longer fur. Finally, I'm ready to dab some paint onto the background. I follow the same steps. Pre-wet the paper, drop first light wash in blue and green. Next, still wet on wet mid-values for some shadows. I want it to be blurry, so there are no fine details here. The third step is to define details. They're usually either darkest darks or lightest lights in value. So, I take a brush with the finest point, mixed value 8 or 9 in neutral tint for darks, and just go over eyes, nose, ears and other parts. For the white, I use white acrylic paint straight out of the tube and do some finishing touches for the whiskers and a few highlights here and there. So here we have it, a beautiful Siamese cat with a character. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If so, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.